Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I'd like to give a big shout out to all the fallen soldiers, all the ones that our government fails to mention, wars that everyone knows about, to the covert wars. You guys risk a lot, and you get disrespected on the front end and the back end. For example, during the Vietnam War, the United States issued the M16 rifle, a notoriously bad rifle. They'd issued it to soldiers fighting in Vietnam, which is a jungle, and they issued it without cleaning kits, leading to the deaths of hundreds of soldiers. Now, if you knew a weapon wasn't that good, why would you rush it into production? Because you don't care. And the worst thing, when the soldiers got home, they were disrespected even more. So if you know a veteran, thank a veteran. If you see a veteran, thank a veteran. Unless they're one of them racist pricks. Anyway, let's get to the show. The cameras are gone. The march is over. The speeches are finished. And America thinks it understands the civil rights movement. But somewhere in Louisiana, 1965, there's a man sitting in a car with a shotgun across its lap. Engine off, lights off, radio low. He's watching a house. Inside that house, a civil rights worker, a target. And the only reason that family is sleeping tonight is because 3 men outside decided they were done waiting for protection.
My name doesn't matter much tonight. Around here, most of us keep things quiet. Not because we are ashamed, because the Klan listens. They always have. I fought for this country once already. Cold mountains, frostbitten rifles, men screaming in languages I didn't understand. I wore the same uniform as every other American soldier. Same flag on my shoulder too. Then I came home to Louisiana and learned something real quick. That flag didn't protect me here. The first time I saw the Klan ride past my street, I was sitting on the porch with my wife. It was late, summer air heavy and thick. You could hear cicadas screaming in the trees. Then headlights appeared. 3 trucks. Men standing in the beds wearing white robes like ghosts from hell. My wife grabbed my arm. She didn't scream. Black folks in the South learned a long time ago that screaming just gives them what they want. They slowed down. One of them yelled something I won't repeat. Another fired a shotgun into the air. Then they drove off laughing like it was a damn parade. That night, something changed in me. I had carried a rifle in a war zone. I watched friends die in frozen mud. Yet somehow I was supposed to come home and pretend these cowards had power over my family.
We gotta get something straight immediately. The civil rights movement was built on nonviolence. That part is real. Leaders, like Martin Luther King Jr., deeply believed in it. Organizations trained people not to fight back. The strategy that they used exposed the brutality to the world, and it worked. But here's what doesn't get said enough. Nonviolence did not mean people were unprotected, because the South in the 1960s was not just racist, it was violent as fuck. I mean documented violence. We're talking nighttime shootings into homes, churches bombed, activists beaten and killed. Law enforcement often refused to intervene. And one of the clearest examples of that danger came in 1964 during Freedom Summer. 3 activists, James Chaney, an African American, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, 2 Caucasian Americans. They were kidnapped and murdered in Mississippi. It wasn't hidden violence. It was national news. So I want you to ask yourself, if that's what happens in broad daylight, what do you think was happening at night?
A few weeks later, I heard about a meeting in Jonesboro. Quiet gathering. Word passed through church friends and barber shops. Veterans most. Men who had worn the uniform. Men who knew what a rifle was for. We met in the back room of a church. Windows covered. Doors locked. One of the men stood up. Calm voice. Military posture. He said something simple. They burn crosses because nobody stops them. Then he said the words that changed everything. We are going to stop them. That was the night the Deacons for Defense began. Now people think we were some wild gang of gunmen. That's not how it worked. Not even close. Everything had rules. You had to be recommended by someone we trusted. You had to prove you could stay calm under pressure. And you had to understand something important. We were not hunting anybody. We were protecting our people. That difference mattered. Most nights we patrolled in pairs. Sometimes 3 men. Radios crackling low so nobody heard us from the road.
November 1964. Jonesboro, Louisiana. A group of black men meet quietly. Most of them are veterans. World War II, Korea. Men trained in weapons, discipline, and survival. They're not activists in the traditional sense. They're not trying to make speeches. They're responding to a threat, Klan harassment, and a complete lack of protection from local authorities. So they make a decision that changes everything. They form the Deacons for Defense and Justice. Sounds like a superhero fucking league. And their mission is clear. Protect black communities and civil rights workers from violence. Not attack, not provoke, protect. And this is where people get it twisted. The Deacons were not random guys grabbing guns. They were structured, disciplined, organized. Membership was controlled. You had to be trusted. You had to follow rules. You had to understand one thing. You do not escalate unless necessary. Their operations included armed night patrols, guarding activist homes, escorting civil rights workers, and monitoring suspicious vehicles. They used radios, coordinated movements. They worked like a defensive unit. And here's a critical fact. They operated legally under state gun laws. They were not hiding. They were visible. And that visibility changed everything.
We drove slowly through neighborhoods where civil rights workers were staying. Homes where families had received threats. Porches stayed dark. Curtains moved just enough for someone inside to see our car pass. Sometimes you'd see a little hand wave through the window. That meant more than any medal I got in Korea. The Klan hated it. They were used to being the only men with guns in the dark. Then suddenly they weren't. One night in Bogalusa, we got a call over the radio. Truck heading your direction. 3 cars behind it. That meant trouble. We parked at the end of the road and cut the engine. Headlights off. Shotguns resting across our knees. You could hear the engines coming long before you saw the lights. When they turned the corner, we stepped into the road. Not shouting, not threatening. Just standing there with rifles visible. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then one of the drivers leaned out the window and stared at us. I could see his eyes through the mask. He realized something right then. This wasn't a one-sided game anymore. The trucks turned around. No cross burning that night. Word spread fast after that. Klansmen started thinking twice before rolling into our neighborhoods. Civil rights workers started sleeping a little more easily.
Bogalusa, Louisiana. If you want to understand the Deacons, you have to understand Bogalusa. This was a heavily segregated mill town and a stronghold for the KKK. When civil rights activists began organizing there in 1965, black homes were shot up, demonstrators were attacked, and the police failed to protect them. So the Deacons expanded into Bogalusa, and this is documented. They began armed patrols in the streets, not secretly, but fucking openly. And that created a situation the South was not used to, because now, the Klan wasn't the only motherfuckers with guns. There's no Hollywood shootouts here. That's important. What changed things wasn't gunfights. It was deterrence. Documented accounts show Klan caravans approaching neighborhoods, Deacons intercepting them while being armed, and the Klan turning around. No speeches, No negotiations. Just a shift in reality. Violence was no longer the go-to move. And when violence stopped working, it started happening less.
The cameras never showed us. Reporters loved filming marches in daylight. They loved speeches and police dogs and fire hoses. But they always went home before the sun went down. That's when our shift started. We guarded church meetings where organizers planned protests. We escorted buses carrying volunteers. Sometimes we just sat outside someone's house all night so their kids could sleep. People ask if we were afraid. Of course we were. Anyone holding a gun who says they aren't scared is either lying or stupid. But fear isn't the worst feeling. Powerlessness is worse. Watching your people get hunted like animals is worse. Holding your baby while men outside laugh about burning your house down is worse.
The situation in Bogalusa became so intense that it forced federal involvement. And one major outcome was the United States be the original Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. This case resulted in federal restrictions on Klan activity, court orders to protect civil rights workers. But you gotta understand this. Federal action did not come from moral appeals alone. It came from pressure, escalation, and the very real possibility that violence could spiral further. Organizations like the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, or the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, operated in these same areas. Publicly, they followed nonviolence. Privately, they often accepted protection. Because organizers knew something simple. You can't protest if you're dead. So while leaders spoke about peace, men like the Deacons made sure those leaders survived long enough to be heard. And this story complicates the narrative. And people don't like complicated history. It's easier to say nonviolence won. And it did, strategically and morally. But it wasn't the only factor. Because behind that movement was a layer of protection that rarely made headlines. Men who didn't want attention. Men who didn't want credit. Men who just wanted their people to live. So the next time you see those images, the marches, the beatings, the courage, which it's hard to say with this fucking DEI initiative. Fucking idiots. I want you to remember something. That story doesn't end when the sun goes down. Because when the cameras left, and the reporters went home, and the streets went quiet, there were still men awake, sitting in cars, watching roads, listening to radios. They weren't looking for a fight, but they were ready if one came. They were the Deacons for defense. And they didn't just protect people, they protected the movement itself. Now you might be wondering, who were the Deacons? Well, first off was Earnest Thomas. He was the organizer who drew the line. He was one of the founding figures of the Deacons in Jonesboro, Louisiana in 1964. He wasn't a celebrity, and he wasn't trying to be one. He was a working class African American man living in a place where the Klan operated openly. Black families were threatened regularly. Police protection was unreliable or non-existent. Thomas helped organize the first Deacons chapter after repeated harassment and intimidation in the area. What made him critical wasn't just anger, it was structure. He helped shape the Deacons into something disciplined. Membership screening, organized patrols, clear, defensive purpose. It wasn't chaos, it was deliberate. And Thomas represents the moment where frustration turned into organized resistance. And we have Frederick Douglass Kirkpatrick, the spokesman who said it out loud. Frederick became one of the most visible voices of the Deacons, especially in Bogalusa. Unlike many others, he spoke publicly about what they were doing, and he didn't soften it. He made it clear. The Deacons supported civil rights activism, but they rejected the idea that black communities had to remain defenseless. Kirkpatrick worked closely with civil rights groups, including CORE. He understood the balance. Publicly, nonviolence. Privately, protection. His role matters because he documented the mindset of the Deacons. He explained something people still struggle with. Self-defense and civil rights were not opposites. They were operating at the same time. And then we have Charles Sims, the man who took it into the streets. Charles Sims was a leader of the Deacons in Bogalusa, Louisiana, the most intense battleground for the group. Sims was a veteran, disciplined, calm under pressure, and he led during the period when Klan violence was escalating. Civil rights protests were increasing, and the town was on edge. Under Sims's leadership, the Deacons in Bogalusa conducted armed patrols, provided direct protection for activists, and confronted Klan intimidation in real time. This is not speculation. It's documented in interviews and the historical records. Sims represented the phase where the Deacons were no longer just forming. They were actively shaping the environment. And then we have A.Z. Young, the everyday man who stood watch. A.Z. Young represents something important. Not every Deacon was a leader or spokesperson. Most were just regular men, workers, fathers, community members. Young participated in patrols and protection efforts in Louisiana. Men like him sat outside homes at night, monitored roads, responded to threats. No headlines, no recognition. But without men like Young, the structure doesn't work. He represents the reality that this wasn't just a few bold figures. It was a network. And we have Robert Hicks, the man who called them in. Robert Hicks wasn't a Deacon, but his story is essential. He was a civil rights activist in Bogalusa, and his home was repeatedly targeted by the Klan. It was constantly getting shot up, constant threats, and his family lived under pressure. The Deacons stepped in to protect him. Armed men guarded his home at night, and that protection allowed him to continue organizing. This is the connection people miss. The Deacons didn't exist in isolation. They enabled others to operate. Without protection, organizing stops. And Hicks represents the reason the Deacons existed at all. When you put these names together, a pattern becomes clear. They weren't radicals. They were veterans and workers. They weren't disorganized. They built structure. And they were not attacking. They were strictly defending. And most importantly, they were present where the danger actually was. At night, in neighborhoods, in front of homes, and away from cameras.
So yeah, we carried guns. Not because we loved violence. Because we loved our families more. Years later, people started talking about the civil rights movement as if it were one long, peaceful march. I'm proud of those marches. But I'll tell you something the history books don't say. The peaceful protests worked partly because the Klan knew something. Somewhere in the shadows of those towns were men like us. Veterans, neighbors, men who had already fought one war and were not afraid to fight another. We were the Deacons for defense. And when the cameras went home and the night got quiet, we were the ones standing guard.
And that's where we'll leave it. Fuck ICE. Fuck this administration. Bunch of fucking weirdos.